Hello, welcome back to my Alteryx video series where we're dealing with my favorite Daisy Hill Puppy Farm data. We're going to be talking about creating a summary table in our datamart, specifically around puppy performance. We'll talk a little bit about why we would need this table, how it fits into it, and look at how Alteryx workflows can easily accomplish the creation of this data in order to make reporting much easier. My buddy John Q came to me with this problem. As he was dealing with our Daisy Hill data, he realized that he had a need for a summary table in order to create some dashboards and reports to show how well we're doing with the training and the performances of our puppies from our puppy academy. This problem was a bit sticky for him when he was strictly dealing with the reporting tool, as the data coming in does not match what he needs in order to report it, and building the structures was beyond his ability to build the complex data structures within the reporting tool. And obviously this is where Alteryx comes into play. It is much easier in Alteryx to build some of your more complex data sets for reporting than it is to deal with them within SQL or within some of the other constructs available to you within the reporting tools. Specifically, one of the problems in this data set is where he has to combine data at different levels of granularity coming out of the same table. So what are John's requirements? Well, he simply needs some counts summarized by each of the puppies. He needs to understand the average and the longest and shortest performances by each puppy. But now comes the more sticky problem, and that is that he wants to know how the puppies are performing as compared to the average across the academy. So we will go ahead and solve this problem for John and build a nice workflow along the way. A lot of people, when they're actually building some data inside of their data mart, either rely strictly upon the source data, which in this case this is a puppy performance table, or they build a reporting table specific to the need. In this case, we're going to sort of cut the middle ground, and that is we're going to take our puppy performance table and build a more intermediary summary fact table that might not exactly answer John's reporting requirements, but it gives him the data so that it can easily generate his dashboards and his reporting requirements out of it. And so this is the table that we're going to build for John for his reporting. And we're going to call it the Puppy Performance Summary Fact Table and be part of the Puppy Data Mart. Along the way, we're going to be using some widgets that we've used in the past, as well as some that I'm going to introduce specifically for this purpose. In addition, we want to talk a little bit about how you can utilize the ability within Alteryx to duplicate and split your data flow, take actions within each of those new branches of your data stream, bring them back together at the end in order to create a single entity that you can put into your database for reporting purposes. So let's go ahead and get started. I've already taken the first step, and that is to bring into my workflow my puppy performance table. As you can see, we can quickly hit the refresh. It'll query this data so you can see it. And we've gone ahead and put a select on to the end of it to make this data match the needs for the workflow. With primarily what I do with this data coming in is that the performance data is a date, and MySQL carries this data as a date time. So we want to change that from a date time into a date. I also, for development purposes, don't need to keep going back to the database every single time to bring this data down. So what I want to do in my input flow is to go ahead and click the cache data, and this will keep the data locally on my machine so I don't have to keep going to the data store each time. When I finish this workflow, I need to make sure that I turn this option off, because I do not want data being cached when I go into production with this data. Alteryx introduced a very nice concept in a couple of versions previously, and that is where once you've cached your data, it gives you some visual recognition of it. As you can see, it's put this little window surrounding my input data widget, and over here in the configuration it tells me that it's been cached, and if I modify any of the parameters associated with this input, it will uncache it for me. So it's both a visual and a configuration reminder of what I've done. So let's deal with the simple piece of this first, and to that we'll go ahead and build a summarize, because a lot of this data simply can be summarized and gotten to John Q. And just to simply walk through this creation of your summarization widget, we want to go ahead and group by our puppies. We want to add a count of the number of costumes that each puppy has. Alteryx gives us a really nice option, which is count distinct. We want to find out the average duration of the performances, so we can take our duration minutes, add into it average. As you can see, average is not in the quick hit. It might take you a little while to find the fact that average is stored under numeric, because you cannot average all elements. So we average our duration. We want to find the last performance date. We can do that with a max. We want to find both the longest and the shortest performances. So we take our duration and we add a min. And at the same time, since we're highlighting that, we can go ahead and add our max. We want to find out how many performances the puppy performed. You can actually count any of the attributes or fields within this data stream, but I tend to go ahead and like to do my counts on a primary key if one is readily available. And finally, we want to know the number of distinct tricks that the puppy has performed. So again, do another count distinct. Over here, you can see that Alteryx has chosen a name for each of the attributes that we've created. We can go ahead and change these here, or change these in a select following this. I tend to like to move my first name changes here to make sure that we come out with what I need and don't have to keep referring back to it. So we have the costume count. Want to go ahead and call this the duration minutes average, just keeping with the sort of naming standard that I like to use. This is the last performance date, giving some business jargon to the technical term of min and max. This happens to be for the minimum duration is the shortest performance, duration minutes, and putting a name on the end of it to call it a quantity. I tend to like to use very long attribute names, because I usually don't have to type them in when I'm using Alteryx. It finds the names that I've given it, so it gives me the ability to go ahead and choose good names or full names. Here I'm going to go ahead and copy this because it makes sense to start with what's there rather than type it all in, because the max is still the performance duration in minutes, but it is the longest. This is the performance count, and this is the trick count. We can now run this. You'll see that very quickly it goes through this data because it's been cached, and it gives me the values that I needed to see. You notice that it's giving me a warning that it has gone ahead and display through the display truncated the duration minutes. I don't need all of that accuracy. So now we will go ahead and drop our select onto here. And for duration minutes, we definitely do not need it to be double precision. So we'll go ahead and choose this as fixed decimal. And we're going to keep 3 decimal places for this and make this a 10.3. I also like to put my attributes in alphabetical order. It makes it easier to find them. Just do a little bit of rearranging here. And a quick check shows that these are indeed good, the attribute names that I needed. They are in alphabetical order, and we're good to go. We'll go ahead and put a browse on the end of this. So now when we run this, we'll get a little bit of data profiling done. And you can see all the data looks pretty clean coming out. So we have the easiest piece of data that John Q needs. The second part of this is that John Q needs us to compare this data and give us some counts against the average trick across the population. So rather than bringing in another data set, I have the exact same data set right here that I need. So simply what I want to do here is force Alteryx to give me a duplicate flow of this data. I do that by bringing another summarization widget onto it and simply dragging my data flow here. And this creates a duplication that splits across so I can actually do different calculations. So pretty easily, now what I can do is, not within puppy width, but within trick, I can group by the trick name, and then I want to find my average duration by trick. Come down into numeric, click on average, and call this trick duration. Minutes. If I could spell, we'd be quicker at this. And this gives me the data that I need here. Again, we can drop a select onto it. So actually a browse onto it because I don't need to select this data. It's really not going anywhere officially, just being part of my calculations. So here we now have for each trick the average duration for each of them. So to find these counts, we need to be able to compare the duration of each puppy's performance against this value. Alteryx only allows you to do calculations or comparisons to the data that is within the same stream. You cannot compare it to something that's outside of your stream, so we need to bring it into the stream. Essentially what we want to do here then is to go ahead and bring the stream of puppy data and the stream of our average together. And we will do that again by getting Alteryx to duplicate the stream of data, bring it in here for our join, and we'll go ahead and keep this browse on the end of it. When we create the join, we want to identify the field that we join them on. This happens to be trick name. It's found in the left and the right, so it's automatically populated. And then when I run this, I need to take a quick look and see how all this fit together, and we see that all the data fit. We haven't duplicated any data. We're still at the 5309 that we started with. And so now when we look at our workflow, we see that we have, as part of the record stream, the duration of the trick as well as the average. This gives us the ability to compare these two to calculate our counted attribute. Now there are a couple of ways that you could do this, and I decided in this video to do it in both ways, so you can decide which one you like better. One of the easy, obvious ones is to go ahead and do this in a formula. So I'll drop in my formula. What I'll want to do is to create a new attribute. Knowing what I'll be doing ahead, which will be counting this, I want to go ahead and create an indicator, new column, calling this the above. Let's get this into the column right here. Above trick, average, duration, indicator. And what I'll do is, if it is above the average, it'll have a 1. If it is below the average, it will have a 0. And this will allow me to go ahead and count for each puppy how many have this indicator, giving me an accurate count of the split. Keep in mind that after I create a new column, I try to make sure at the beginning to set it to what it needs to be, which in this case is an integer. So to expedite this creation of a value, we'll go ahead and cut and paste it from what I saved. And it simply says that if the duration minutes is greater than the trick duration minutes average, then set it to a 1, else 0 we go. Once we've typed this in, we see that a 1 comes up here to show it to us. We can run this again just to make sure we get 1s and 0s at the end, and you can see that there are. If we eyeball them, we can see that it looks like the count is going in here accurately. So how do we get that count by puppy? Let's go ahead and change this comment very quickly so that we don't take up so much room on our screen. So option number 1, we're counting the indicator. So let's go ahead and put our summary here. So what we want to do is summarize this by puppy. So we group by our puppy wid. And we want to count our indicator. Actually sum it. And then this will give us our above trick, average, duration, count. So again, what we're going to do is we're going to summarize those indicators. If it was indeed in our population, it will have a value of 1 because that's what we set it to be. It'll have a 0 if it's not in our population, and so therefore we can just simply count or summarize that value so that we get the actual number of performances that were longer than the average. That might be a bit confusing to you. I hope not, but there is a second way of doing this, and that is letting the Alteryx streams do their work. If you don't want to create a formula, we can actually do a filter. So from this join here, we'll bring this into a filter. What we want to do in this filter is find out where the duration in minutes is less than our average. One of the things with the basic filter is that you can't put a value in here. So it's very easy once you stub the beginning of this, click on custom filter, use the bracket to go ahead so we can get to the average. So now what it will do when we run this is it'll put in the true side all of the performances that were less than the average, and it will put in the false stream all the records that were less than or greater than the average. So again, we can now summarize this information together. And just for completeness, go ahead and change this comment. So now we'll be able to count records as opposed to counting through the indicator. So again, we want to group this by puppy ID. And now being more straightforward, we just simply wanted to count the number of records that pass through the true side of this. So again, using puppy as our counting. And we'll do a count. And this will be our below trick. Average duration count. We'll drop a browse on the end of it so we can see the results. And running through this, you see now that we have by puppy the number of below average count. Here by puppy we have the above average duration count. And here we have all the facts associated with our puppies that have had performances. If we look at the log, you'll notice one thing is that we have 1506 summarized records. Those 1506 puppies have performed, and we have a count of 1506 for the above performance. But you notice some puppies did not have a below performance. So once we filter these off and do a count, we go ahead and we have less than a total set of records. Puppies that did not have lower than average performances will not be represented in this set, and we'll have to deal with that as we come to the end. But again, we now have our three pieces of data in these three streams. So what we have to do is bring all of these together. That allows me to bring in another widget that I don't use as much as I thought I would when I first saw it, because it's a bit restrictive. And in that case, what we want to bring in is what's called the multi-join. This allows you to join multiple streams, not just two streams. If you notice that the input connector is the multiple indicator, whereby it has what is essentially multiple arrows feeding into the same spot. We're going to go ahead and drop this in the middle. As you can see, now we have one stream flowing into it and it's counted for us. We're going to drag this one in as our second stream, and it is also counted. And then finally, we'll drag this in as our third stream. What we need to do here is to indicate how we're going to join these, and obviously puppy width across the board creates us that single join point. Now when we run this, all three streams come together. We get our 1506 records that have all of the counts. We have some fields we don't need because we have the duplicate IDs for each of the streams. But you also notice that we have some null values in here associated with the below trick average duration counts. This indicates those records that were not put through in here. We can correct this with a formula, which is my preferred method of doing it. But I thought I would bring in another widget since many of you might be using it, and it is the data cleansing widget. To a degree, it's a shortcut for dealing with nulls as well as some other problems that you might have. The reason why I tend not to use this widget all the time is that it isn't as efficient as your formulas, whereby it doesn't work on a single record at a time, but it works on buffers of records. And so this might slow down a very large workflow that you have. Our workflow is very small and very limited, so I don't mind using it, but it's to keep this in mind. If you're going to be processing millions of records, you really don't want a bottleneck in your workflow, and this widget might provide that. What we want to do here is just simply for that one field, we will turn off all of the fields being selected. We want to select our below trick average duration count. If it's nulls, we want to replace it with zeros. Now when we run this, you can see that our counts have no more null values. Everybody has a value of at least 0. Finally, what we want to do is to go ahead and bring in another piece of data. And we'll do that because we need that timestamp in here as well. So we'll bring in our date time widget, putting into the default date and time stamp format, which is found down here. Year, month, day, hours, minutes, seconds. That allows us to put a select widget onto the end to turn this text field into a date time field. We also want to clean up our original stream at this point. By dropping a select onto here, we do not need the input 2 and the input 3. We just need the other values. Once we remove these values, we can now run this. Just before we go further, we see that the data is in the order that we want it to see. We can click on here, click on metadata just to see that things look good. We have the right fields. We have some integer 64s in here that we need to correct. So let's go back into here. So the average trick count is integer 32 to get these down in size. Clicking on each one is an easy switch. Run this through again. Take a look. Format looks good for what we have here. Let's go ahead and check on our date. We see that it is indeed a date time. So now what we want to do is to go ahead and append this date time into our stream. We've done this before. Running our stream, things look good. They're in the right order. They have good types. Data looks clean. We're ready to store this into our database. Now that we have the data looking good, we're going to want to put it into our database. I'm going to leave the browse on here just so I can continue to look at the data if I need to. And what I'll need to do is drop in an output widget to go to MySQL database. Rather than drag and drop it, I'll copy the one that I already have out there. Again, it's pretty straightforward. Drag our connection in. It's going to my AWS database. We give it the name of Puppy Performance Summary Fact. I create the SQL style of none because I don't like the quotes going on there. And then I also want to make sure that I get that primary key created that I need. And rather than do this manually within the database after the table is created, I'll go ahead and add the alter table statement inside of my post create SQL. So that will go ahead and do that as well. That being done, I can now run this. I have noticed that the inserting of data into the AWS database is a bit slow, so I just will wait until it finishes and then continue on with this video. So when we have completed the writing of the data out, we can look at the overall workflow that we've generated. As a sort of a thought is that the writing of this data is a much slower than I would expect it to be. If this was my production environment and I was experiencing this write issues, and when I'm not experiencing any read issues, I would get with my DBA and we would try to figure out how to tune either the database, the server, or this workflow to match more efficient metrics. That being said, we're ready to productionalize this, except for we have one little problem. And that is the fact that what we have done here is to create a new table. When this thing goes into production, what I will need to do at this point in time is not drop this table and recreate it each time, because if it was in production, I would not want to drop any permissions or any references that I have in it, because that would make the process much slower as well. And so what I will want to do is to use one of the other options inside of the output widget. To do that, we're going to go ahead and make a copy of this widget, paste it in down here. We'll drag it into the bottom, and now we'll reconfigure this to be the productionized version, which is rather than dropping the table, what I want to do would be to delete the data that's in it and append the new records to it. That way I keep all of the same structure, I keep all of the permissions. Any other work that I've done with this table will stay in the database. So I will simply put the records back into it. That being said, I do not need the alter table, so I will go ahead and delete that. This gives me my productionalized version of it. But because I don't want to lose the output widget that went ahead and created a table initially, in case I have to repeat the creation of the table due to additional changes in the future, I simply want to disconnect this widget because that will throw an error in production. But I have another option available to me. And if we go back to my favorites, don't forget about this tool container. Give it a name of Overwrite Table. What we can do is drag the table creation widget into this, and then we can simply disable it. What that means is that when we run this in normal production, that part of the stream will not be executed, and we will simply execute the append. And just so I remember how I did this, so that if I do have to recreate the table, I can make it easy to turn off the delete and append. I will create a second tool container. I'll drop the append in here. That's what I'm going to be using. And then in order to test this widget in its entirety, I want to go ahead and turn off the cache. This way I'll force a read. This becomes my production ready workflow. I will run it to make sure it works. Starts with reading our data. Everything flows through. And we write the output by appending to our production table. Hope this helps when you're trying to create a data store for one of your analysts. Have any questions, please put them in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe so that you can see future videos about Alteryx and the Daisy Hill Puppy Farm.